Hito, thank you so much for the talk. It's very tempting to immediately launch into trying to compare the different ways in which you've both described uploads coming down as shitstorms. But I want to just very briefly, also because Sohrab was reading so fast, I wanted to ask you to just clarify something which I assumed to be central to your argument, and that maybe would also help us create a common ground here. Not that that would be too difficult. Namely, when you were talking about the pedagogy of war, and you were quoting Keenan via Weizmann, or maybe the other way around. Yeah, and you were saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a particular kind of warfare which creates a subject by way of pointing out possible escalations in the future. And if I understood correctly, in Syria, it's something else that's happening, but I may be wrong there. Either way, maybe you could explain the direction in which you were going.
I was kind of trying to figure out if, first of all, sorry that I was running. I just got really nervous. I just read really fast, so my apologies. But as I said, it's I was trying to see if images could somehow take on some of this pedagogical responsibility, actually, to sort of mediate between the inflicted violence and possibility of its escalation through as sort of like this sort of intermediate as sort of like intermediate agents almost that will sort of help I mean, in this case, it's the regime, but whoever we want to think to actually assess the situation and possibly escalate or de-escalate and sort of use them. But also, I feel like in the other way, they have other pedagogical uses. For instance, in the as I tried to mention in the famous video that came out that a rebel is, I think it's like eating someone's liver, or there's actually experts are in slight disagreement if it's liver or heart, but in any case, it has pedagogical use in a way, and I mean, maybe it's a different way, but sort of I was really intrigued by that idea, if that in any ways clarifies anything.
It does.
It's so fascinating, this point, because it relates, and maybe I would like to ask you to maybe try to brainstorm through this potential relation with me, this figure of the augur, is this how you pronounce it? The Haruspex in the German original, this sort of shaman, basically, who tries to guess not only the future, but in Benjamin, really who the guilty are. This figure of the opening the body sort of eerily or uncannily resonates with the content of some of these videos, right? So opening the body takes on very, very different meanings in these different examples. On the one hand, there is the shaman augur that opens the body in order to find the truth and to find the perpetrators, right? On the other hand, you have the perpetrators opening the bodies in order to, I don't know, do what exactly, no? And that also reminds me of another figure with Benjamin, which is, of course, the well-known trope of the surgeon opening the body, which he deploys in the age of the artwork in the age of mechanical reproduction to make the point that aura does not exist in a situation in which proximity, really reaching into people's body, has become a daily practice. So maybe I don't know, maybe you are able to link these different things with one another.
Thanks for question, but I'm not. I think there were two. He sort of. I was actually trying to refer to this paragraph in the end of the short or little history of photography, where Benjamin says, yes, this point to the guilty, but also he compares, as you mentioned, the photographer with the figure of these kind of oracles. I think it's Agur, but I don't know if that's the right pronunciation. So, and Aristippus, which I think they were somewhat had similar positions within the state, but also and performed similar tasks. But one of it was, which was to sort of read the pattern of the flight of the birds, and they could also tell the will of God by reading that, and also could tell the future. And another was actually, I guess, to read the intestines of a sacrificed animal to tell the future, and which in a way it's actually real. We could tie that into the image of like that video that I'm not going to talk about anymore. But yeah, but it was fascinated by the fact that these people, these oracles, had the power to actually change the way that the events and the basically course of action, or they could predict the future or like change the course of action, and that's a lot of power, obviously. And Benjamin is sort of comparing the photographer to this kind of figure. And this was really what to me was mainly really fascinating, but in a way it sort of like, I feel that it inserts these images in a way that I feel maybe you were also explaining, inserts the images into this whole conception of reality, but also some kind of a conception of a possible future. And, deciding the fate of state, which I think, I'm not sure if, I can make it maybe some kind of relationship between, the use of sort of this commentary on the videos by sort of someone like John Kerry to justify the attack, but in a way it feels like, yes, it seems to have a stake in change of the future of a state as well, but I'm not sure if that's a good example, but it's a possible example, if that makes any sense.
I think these two could go on for a while. Are there questions from the audience already? There's two here.
Thank you for your papers. I've got a question for Hito. I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit on some of the definitions that you're deploying about the image, and I guess it's because I find it hard to imagine a condition where the image was ever alive. Images are inorganic entities that nevertheless have force and affect, but they're not alive. And in that sense, I kind of also wonder at what point ever were images not producing our reality. I've always understood that from the birth of culture, that images produce our reality, and we live with images as technical objects as part of that condition of civility in life and society. So I guess I wonder about the kind of historicization that you kind of showing us, this kind of genealogy of the image, passing from life to death, and from its separation from the life world to a participation within it, because I wouldn't have seen those distinctions to be available, and I'm not quite sure how to understand the distinctions you're making. So I guess my final point is that if your definition of a dead image is something that's bureaucratic and organizational, but which nevertheless generates a material reality of the image for us, I couldn't help but wonder about how the kind of critical position that you're proposing of that dead space of materially lived images that you kind of showed us, how we can be the social network. We are the image. We live as the image, but at the same time, you're proposing that we also intervene within the image and hack it. I don't know how we can do both, because that would require a kind of split subject, a kind of split schizophrenic subject that I don't think actually exists. So I just wondered if you could maybe clarify these questions for me. Thanks.
Well, I think I was very careful not to say that any image was dead, right? What I was talking about media, forms of different containers, if you like cinema or the online world. And I was careful, because I heard that so many times, not to only state that they didn't feel that vital at the moment. And I think that to give it a very precise definition, I think that at one moment they lose the status of really being at the cutting edge of social contradictions, right? And then they sort of withdraw from that position. With cinema, this is definitely the case. Cinema, all the modes of production of cinema, traditional cinema, have so much been tied to the modes of production, to the factory. So I think this is a moment when the, let's say, tensions, productive tensions, withdraw from a container, let's put it like that. I wasn't meaning to imply images were dead or alive, but I think, in fact, that, I certainly am aware of the fact, that imagery has entered, my living body to a very large extent, and I think this is a shared condition among many people nowadays. And to make it very, I wasn't suggesting to hack the image, right? But to hack the circuits in which images circulate and the ways in which they are able to transform or to, pass the threshold between 2D and 3D reality, the circuits in which images are being disseminated. So it's not about hacking the image. And I think I don't think that any kind of schizophrenic subject is created in this way, and I'm not so sure about the idea of subjectivity in this situation anyway.
I wasn't suggesting that the image was hacked, but the system... sorry, thanks. I wasn't suggesting the image was hacked, but the system. So, for example, you show an image saying, we are the social network, i.e. we are the system. Mm-hmm. And then you talk about hacking the system of circulation. So if you are the system and you're hacking the system, that's the schizophrenic moment I'm trying to describe. No, it's not, because there's many ways in which the modes of circulation are being hardwired now, and produced and manufactured and controlled and monopolized. So what I meant by hacking is to try to change the way of how these things are connected to one another, right? And there was some, maybe it will come back to me later.
Thanks both of you for your papers. My question is primarily for Hito, and it follows on in a way from what Amanda was saying, because I suppose I was a bit concerned by this language that you were using, where you're splitting 3D reality from whatever else it is that isn't 3D reality. Yeah. And the reason it follows on from what Amanda's saying is that 3D reality, if you want to call it that, is part of the language, if you like, of a world in which we live, or the world, or worlds in which we live. Because 3D reality is there and we interact with it because it has certain values for us, and therefore it is ideological. It is, in essence, a kind of language form. 3D reality that is of any consequence to us is part of that system of circulation. It is language. to the extent that language is a material system. That's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And so, for example, when you said that images are nodes of energy traveling across modes of reality, I mean, I agree with you, but I wonder how is that any different from saying that images are metaphors? In the broadest sense, philosophical sense, that metaphors are objects it's within language.
No, it's not. It's not, let's say, substantially different, right? But what I think has really changed is the speed and the different forms that images can take now very quickly, right? In being realized in many different forms and proliferating and disseminating and transforming and so on. So I think this has changed dramatically within the past, I don't know, maybe 2 decades or so. Definitely. And in the longer version of the talk, I go on about, calling into question this idea of 3D reality by saying, and this might be equally, objectionable, but I have this idea of 4D, of course, networked space, which is essentially a medium, right? So this space is a medium as such into which all previous forms of media are embedded and somehow sublated and conserved also. I mean, they keep functioning. There's still cinema, there's still television, all these things exist, right? But that there is now this additional dimension which contains them in a way and provides a different set of relations to them. So, I mean, this is really the whoa, really bullet point short version of the talk.
I agree with you. I agree with you, and that is in a way to say that. I suppose what I really was asking, was based on my sympathy for your socialist subtext, which you have to the paper, and I have sympathy for that. You were talking about redistribution of the 3D world. Mm-hmm. In a manner similar to the possibilities of this distribution and circulation that you described on the internet, and I have sympathy for that hugely. But what I worry about is that socialism proper requires a non-idealist materialism, and you're describing these circulation forms as ideology. These circulation forms are languages themselves. They simply work as languages in the expanded philosophical sense of what a language is, and therefore they are ideology.
It's interesting because, I'm really a filmmaker by training and by practice. So when I think about that, it's rather about editing, right? It's about re-editing ways or reconnecting ways in different forms, remontaging things rather than creating new languages, working about whatever exists, but to recombine it using the tools of post-production, right? So in a way, this is the mental space I operate within. I mean, I understand what you mean, but okay, let me just explain that this is where I was coming from.
Hi, thanks for your papers. I have 2 very simple remarks. Hito, your idea of circulationism, what would it mean about the distinction between the human and the non-human? It's something that's come up previously. Can you hear me?
Would you mind repeating it?
I wonder your idea of circulationism, what it would mean for the distinction between the human and the non-human. It's something that's come up in different conferences, and I wonder what your take is on that. Yeah. And Sohrab, I didn't quite get your moment when you were talking about Nancy. It felt like there were 2 ideas of truth that you were talking about, and of course it remitted me to Amanda's excursus on truth and false truth. I don't know if they're connected at all, but maybe you can just expand a bit on that.
Would you like to start?
Well, I was just trying to, Bensei's trying to talk about some kind of a dialectical relationship between truth and violence. And that was what I was mainly thinking about. And he sort of is trying to somewhat, the position is that for truth to sort of image itself, and he uses image. He would use imaging as from like a verb. It requires some kind of violence, but vice versa. But on the other hand, violence also reveals itself as a form of a truth. So he's sort of thinking about the image as sort of a battleground of this, if that makes sense. That's sort of really his conception, and it's just trying to use that as a way to start. And I can actually read you the quote again, and so maybe instead of like trying to paraphrase it, I can come up with a more okay.
No, I'd like to hear.
I think.
No, you don't want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's...
Messed everything up. Hito, would you like to?
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for your question. I mean, it allows me to really also point out a crucial complication in whatever I have been saying. I mean, your question, essentially, I can't answer it. This needs to be figured out. Until a while ago, I would have, immediately said, yes, of course, and it's basically the same, it's all material and so on. Now I'm not so sure anymore, because things tend to get treated a lot better than humans nowadays. So there is a certain, distinction re-emerging between things and humans. So I think I have to re-evaluate that. But then again, it also gives me the opportunity for trying also to complicate this idea of circulationism by going back to the historical precedent, productivism, because this, of course, is a hugely ambivalent enterprise, right? Which allied itself with a Stalinist system of production, which essentially it wasn't able to change in the slightest, totally failed at that, right? This might hark back to your question of language and ideology. And I think that, of course, by sort of naively aligning myself with, utopias of free circulation from the 90s, from web culture, I also have to take into account that also the, let's say, idea of free circulation has been corporatized, and appropriated to a huge extent. The idea of free circulation of information and data is one of the vital components of the architecture of surveillance we're seeing right now. So in all these aspects, this idea needs to be complicated, and its ambivalence put into full, be fully allowed to play it out. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify that a lot of work needs to be done with this concept.
Hi, thanks so much for both the papers. I have a question mainly for Hito. If I understand correctly, the proposal or the perspective of circulationism would entail us to become very literate at translation between different images, between different systems, between different media. So following that thought, what would be the consequences for any kind of pedagogical or social framework for art, or for that matter for any discipline, if translation is so central? What does that do to disciplinary questions?
I can't answer this question in general, but I think I have some concrete examples. I mean, this is not to prescribe anything, but I have been thinking about the figure of the woman at the editing desk in opposition to Dziga Vertov's man with the movie camera a lot, and how in the age of post-production this figure becomes more and more central and important. She's already present in the original film, but she's glossed over, even though she's, montaging the whole film, which is essentially about editing, right, not about camera work. So I think that this figure, the woman at the editing desk, is an extremely important figure, because we see in contemporary example how she has figured out to handle the cameras, with the camcorder revolution, to edit it, to put it online, to distribute it across a platform of different media, but also to learn the tools of managing that information, of handling it safely, I don't know if you know filmmaker Laura Poitras, but she's a prime example for me of being able to, negotiate information, images, and circulation across all these platforms to an astonishing extent. And for me, it's stunning and flabbergasting that individual people are able to do this nowadays, while on the other hand, the tools of repression and surveillance have so dramatically increased. So I think being able to do this will become one of the key skills for contemporary times. But of course, it's not prescriptive. I think this is really speaking from my practice as a filmmaker again, and I think in any practice there will be similar examples of how to translate it and apply that.
Rita, I believe you had a question.
So thank you both so much. That was really fantastic. Yesterday, Eric was talking about the fact, I think, that there are too many videos on YouTube for basically anyone. Can you not hear me?
No, it's difficult to hear you properly.
Yesterday, Eric was talking about the fact that there are too many videos on YouTube for anyone, basically, to be able to watch them. And I was kind of amazed, Sohrab, to see in your screen grabs from YouTube that almost all those videos have about 80 views and like 1 like, 1 dislike.
5 views.
So I was thinking to myself that, well, it's the quantity that matters. That's what it's documenting. The fact that FNN Media has 20,000 videos that only 5 people watch. But then you said, Hito, that these videos are not about documentation, that they generate a reality. So I'm wondering, what kind of reality do they generate if they can't mobilize more than 5 people to press a like button? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Can I answer? Please. You go. Please.
I'm not sure what kind of reality they produce, but and I'm I think it's fascinating that there's actually, this is a very small selection of many more similar videos, and they all have maybe 4 or 5 clicks. And probably I would feel that some of the people who were in this, who were in the battalion, probably went and watched it maybe online, or me and some other people. But I kind of was really interested that they're, for the same reason that actually they're not viewed but by too many people, they actually have this very performative role, because they become almost like a document that only once that this formation is announced to the internet, regardless of anyone watches it or not, then there actually is a battalion, or like someone has officially defected the army. And it seems like there was an urge to do this. It sort of became some kind of a meme, because otherwise I'm sure you can have a battalion, or you could defect from army and maybe not be on the internet, but there is some kind of relationship that makes people really want to do this. And I feel like it's really like some kind of a meme almost. That.
Would you say that that's the opposite of the movement that Hito describes, from 2D to 3D, from social media to the street? This is a movement from the street to social media. Like, it only happened when it happened for 5 people on YouTube.
I don't.
You have to use the mic, please.
I would say that the reason why it exists is because the internet has moved into the street, and that now the performance needs to happen there. But I'm not Sohrab, and I haven't seen so many of these. So.
Yeah, but it seems, I mean, I don't know anything about, but in the way you described it, right, it seemed like a gesture of making things real, of creating the act of defection via a video act, so to speak. It's not a speech act saying I defect, yes, but the recording creates the defection. I mean, this is how you presented it. And I think it also, even if it's not being seen, it creates this population of images, no? so that there is in a way this silent majority or silent crowd of images which people know and draw on, for legitimation somehow. So basically being seen is maybe not the important point.
This question is for Sohrab. I find this last branch of the discussion really, really interesting. And I'm curious if you have any idea where these tropes may come from. For example, the image of these fighters kind of sitting in this very prearranged way. I mean, every video had the exact same trope.
Actually, I think the so-called jihadi videos that I think that Tom actually has an incredible archive of it. That could be one sort of precedence to these, but or different. I think there's a really interesting artwork or video by Rabbi. How do you pronounce Rabbi? Imru. It's called Three Posters, and it's sort of about the discovery of a suicide bomber's sort of declaration and sort of how it was rehearsed. So I'm not going to talk about the piece, but so that is from the 1980s, and it's from before the recent. It was from the Lebanese Civil War, and it has nothing to do with. And Rabbi would actually insist on saying that it has nothing to do with the jihadi sort of suicide bombers. For him, it's actually this distinction. It's very important, but anyway, I think it's also like part of maybe similar to the same trope. But with these, I think what is even more fascinating is that there is a laptop in front of everyone. And
they are all made by Dell.
Huh?
They are all made by Dell.
Yeah, they are.
It's like a testimonial.
I was thinking maybe they're Skyping that at the same time. I don't know, but it's really fascinating that at least in most of these, that maybe there's a few that I didn't have, but most of the ones that I watched, that is an integral part of it. So I think that's like a new addition to the same trope, if that makes sense.
I think that Keenan has been asking for the mic for a while.
I just wanted to add something, maybe an answer that you could have given to Orit, Sohrab. I thought that your argument was when you used the quotation from the How to Make a Battalion in 5 Easy Steps. Wasn't the argument that images were moving into the real world because, so that would be Hito's claim, because in order to make videos, people are forming battalions which then engage in armed conflict, right? So the war happens, or some of the fighting happens, at least, in order that videos can be made. So in some way, the video precedes the fighting and enables it, and in that sense, there is this move. So it doesn't matter how many people watch the video. The video is having its effect not by being watched, but by the fact of being made, and what gets created simultaneously with the video is an armed battalion, which is a combat unit. Yes, no?
Yes, and I feel given I don't think it will be for all the videos coming out of Syria, because I'm not sure all of the citizen journalists are actually, paid or given arms and trade the videos for whatever thing that they want to get. But for the most part, yes, I think at least for these, I feel they fulfill a certain purpose in this economy, and that is to, at point, also be a document of a money well spent. That is also another part of it.
They're like a
Can
receipt.
I just make a small comment to that? So I was structuring that part of your presentation because when you were describing how people were disfigured, right, in custody, once they were taken prisoner, how they were tortured. So in a way, I thought that, this is what happens when people get actually pulled from, let's call it 3D reality for now, okay? So when they get pulled into the network, by coincidence, you know, I made a research about the internet monitoring systems being sold to, for example, Syria, but also Egypt, Bahrain, Yemen, Iran, by German companies, right? So this massive surveillance has been going on for a long time in these countries, and this is also the base on which many of the activists were arrested, because they were uploading things to YouTube. And I think it's such a violent, no, how do you call it? Realization of being drawn into the network by being disfigured, no? Disfigured. Your image totally changes by getting dragged across the screen, but in the other direction.
Just wanted to very quickly add, in answer to the gentleman's question over there, those images perhaps link up with what Olivia was saying earlier about the Christianization of the world through this kind of diffuse media. Those soldiers or paramilitaries were sat behind desks that looked like altars. There was one where 2 guns were either side of the laptop.
Yes.
In a very carefully arranged way. They always had a flag or some kind of,
Quran.
very nice tablecloth or a doily or something, crochet. But more importantly, they were all speaking to an object, the computer, which had within it, if you like, or was emanating the non-organic human spirit. And they were present in that image, and so it was within them. I mean, it's a Christian narrative. You know, God was within them, Christ was within them, the spirit, if you like, and yet it's an inorganic spirit derived of the human. I mean, it's a classic, and it's diffuse, it's everywhere, you can't locate it. You know, what they're looking at on screen is themselves on screen, effectively. But, so it's a narcissistic Christian ritual, so they're becoming de facto Christians, even though they might be Muslim or some other religion.
Thanks. I mean, I think that's an interesting observation. However, I'm really concerned about evoking Christianism, and especially I feel it happens a lot in sort of European and American context, that there's sort of some kind of obsession with ontology in a certain way, and like sort of linking everything to the Greeks and then to the Pope, and you know. But if we just use it like really metaphorically, I think just wanted to take the Christianity out of it.
I mean,
because they're all Muslims, actually. Let's put it that way.
One could just imagine, no, the kind of viral meme it would immediately create when you were to do the counter shot and reveal what these guys are actually looking at, right? All these cat gifs and I don't know. Facebook.
Someone else.
It's what's happening in that moment is a private redemption. So if 5 people watch it, it doesn't matter. And as Tom was saying, you know, just the fact that it is made is the moment of the politics, which is a private politics. It's a private moment of redemption for those soldiers or paramilitaries, which in itself is extremely problematic. It's not a public act. We think it's public because it's on a medium that stretches far and wide, potentially, but it doesn't. It goes to 5 people or whatever. But even if it goes to 100,000, it's still a private act of redemption, it seems.
David had a question.
Hello? Oh. Just to follow up on Matt's question, I was wondering if you could go back, Sarah, to the idea of money well spent. And I might have missed this in your talk, but just the people who are actually paying for, I mean, the sector of video production that involves paying people to actually make these videos, which do they get more views, or what's the point in that? I mean, what's the end? What do the commissioners of these videos have in mind?
Not exactly sure what they have in mind, but there was at least one report on NPR that I found it really interesting. It was about this sort of how CIA was actually already arming the rebels to some extent, and but they really wanted for the whole combat to be videoed. So that would have been the proof that actually it was not going to the wrong hands, that it was in the right hands, and it was achieving what they were hoping to achieve. So that it's might be different from these particular battalion formation videos, which I'm not sure if actually all of them have like this sort of monetary transaction attached to them. But that was like one of the reports that I found like kind of fascinating.
Sohail, you had a question earlier, no? Are there any other questions, comments? I had a very simple question for you, Sohrab. Hito was repeatedly situating herself as a filmmaker with respect to the talk that she just gave, and I was wondering if I could ask for a similar gesture on your part at a conference where most of the speakers are scholars from within the humanities, whether in your case, coming from contemporary art as a writer, as a curator, in which ways that framed your talk. I know that it was haunted by Seth Price, initial ideas about using performance art to read these videos. I know it was also marked by this idea of art trying to create an extra historical space from which to view images. Could you say a few words in that direction?
Well, I'm not sure if I can answer, but I will try. And that is that I wasn't responding to a situation within contemporary art when I started doing this. I had interest that suddenly was somewhat diverted because of because I saw these videos coming out of Syria, and I became like really, really interested in sort of trying to provide a kind of a sort of commentary as a very, actually I did not have any audience. I think my blog had probably fewer views than they, and it was really hard to, so, and comments were off, so it actually was, this is like, I didn't want to face, some kind of questions, but I did think about how, I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly, but I'm wondering if you're asking about these kind of discussions within contemporary art. Is that,
for example? Absolutely.
There could be lots of angles, right? Participation, for example, public sphere.
Well, I think there's different ways that we can look at it. One, I kind of like am very interested as contemporary as a space for discussion, and I think that is something that could happen here, which I think we were in a dinner last night, and this was also emphasized. But I also feel that there's a shift, at least in a lot of art production, from a kind of what was. Maybe in the 70s or like 60s, there's some kind of the sort of first wave of institutional critique that I feel like it was very much related to sort of like sort of invested in the institution itself. And I think a great example of that would be like Hans Hake's project that was actually removed and was not included, and so the show was canceled. And I think I've seen a recent departure from the institution addressing itself as sort of practicing some kind of politics, to more like a space where you can point to some kind of politics, and it fulfills that. I don't know if that's making sense, but that's sort of what I was thinking. But I don't know if that's I don't think I managed to articulate it as the way I wanted. But.
It does make sense.
Okay.
Any last questions, comments? If there aren't, then I would suggest that we hand over to Sohail Malik, who has graciously volunteered to offer a kind of conclusion, summary, last words regarding the conference. But before giving you the stage, I'd like to thank our two speakers once again. Thank you very much.